Hi, campers. We're still reading Poppy. We're on chapter 5. Chapter 5 is called Leaving Grey House. Let me first show you guys that picture of the map. It's at the front of the book. I always like it when authors include a map so that you can kind of follow along. Here's the map. Hopefully you can see that. I'll kind of come closer. So here's the starting, here's the top. And then the bottom. Hopefully that will help a little bit. Maybe you saw where they're leaving Grey House. Let me find where Grey House is, and I see New House. Here it is. So it's a pretty far distance. So Grey House is way down here. We'll have to go through the forest, and New House is right up here. So it's pretty far for a mouse family, or a family of mice. Okay, chapter 5. For the next 2 days, Lungwort worked on the speech he intended to make to Mr. Oakhax. He did this in his study, an old boot that Farmer Lamont had left behind in the front hall steps. After lining the boot with potato sacking, Lungwort had chewed out a couple of windows and then used a plaid necktie to curtain the front entry. Now and again he emerged, papers in hand. Seeking out older members of the families, he would corner them and say, "I need you to listen to this." After reading a paragraph or two, he insisted upon knowing what the listener thought. If they were compliments, he said something like, "No, I don't want flattery. I can't use that. I need hard criticism." When he received criticism, he always argued that his way was best. Then off he'd go in a big grump to take a minute and take minute subtractions or additions to his text, none of which had anything to do with either the compliments or the criticisms that were given to him. So what does that tell you about his character? And what have we learned about his character so far? We'll talk about that probably at the end. While Lungwort prepared his speech, a committee busied itself making a white flag. No one knew whether a flag of this kind was Lungwort's idea or Mr. Oakhax's demand. Even so, whenever there was such a permission party, as the younger mice called it, a new crisp flag was carried so that Mr. Oakhax would have no doubt of the mice's intentions. It would be Poppy's job to march along with her father, bearing the flag. Poppy, meanwhile, did what she said she'd been told to do, relating the facts of Ragweed's death to all the family. Everyone was upset by the story. Being eaten by Mr. Oakhax was a shared nightmare. Moreover, it happened with some regularity. They were all scared of him. There was considerable tut-tutting and a lot of whisker twitching. While everyone expressed sorrow, Poppy suspected that a few grieved. Worst were the words of comfort that began, "Well, if someone had to be sacrificed." I don't understand why they disliked Ragweed so, Poppy protested sadly to Basil, the night before she and Lungwort were to go to Mr. Oakhax. What harm did Ragweed ever do to them? "I can think of 3 things, Basil replied. He was a golden mouse, not a deer mouse. He came from somewhere else, and he said things that upset them. You know, like, you haven't lived unless you die for something." Remember what he told old Plum? A soft belly causes softness at both ends. But I like that he was different, Poppy confessed. He loved adventure. I'll never forget the last words he ever spoke to me. They were so terribly ironic. What's ironic? You know, when the words mean almost the opposite of what you're saying. The last thing he said to me was, "You don't know how to live like I do." What's ironic about that? Basil asked. The next second, Mr. Oakhox killed him. Oh, Basil shuddered. Now, Poppy, her mother began, as she brushed her daughter's fur a final time, above all, do exactly what your father tells you to do. Be respectful towards Mr. Oakhox if he takes notice of you. But if he does not, don't fret. Your father commands his attention. Mr. Oakhox has a great respect for your father. Don't so much as speak unless you're spoken to. Then be humble and be brief. Remember the old saying, mice should always be nice? And for heaven's sake, keep the white flag flying. Above all, sweet Cicely concluded, remember it's an honor that you were selected to go with your father. Yes, Mother, Poppy replied, though what her mother was saying made her very uncomfortable. Longwort appeared at that moment. His hair was slicked down and his whiskers were crisply curled. His tail had been scrubbed to a glowing pink, and his thimble was set at an angle such that he looked proper. Is she ready? He asked his wife. I think so. Longwort examined his daughter with a critical eye. Fine, he said. A good start promises a good finish. All right, Mother, we should be off. Sweet Cicely gave Longwort a nuzzle, whispering, Do be careful. Careful is my middle name, Longwort assured her, and he led the way to the porch. There the whole family of mice had assembled for a send-off. Fireflies had been gathered and now were released, and that gave the moment a festive mood. Poppy, holding the flag, stood at the foot of the front porch steps. Longwort scampered atop an old porch rail and faced the crowd. My fellow mice, he began, paws clasped comfortably over his plump belly, while he surveyed his family with solemn regard. I'm about to leave for my meeting with Mr. Oakhox. Need I remind you how important this departure is? For a moment, the multitude of mice had to stop and be mesmerized. Poppy, unable to make much sense of the words, stopped listening. She was searching for Basil in the crowd. Here's a picture. Be certain, Longwort continued, that I will go toward Mr. Oakhox and move forward with your best interests at heart. I have prepared a fine speech that will, I'm sure, convince him of our needs. He held up a scroll of paper, wrapped carefully in leaves to protect it. I look forward to returning with Mr. Oakhox's kind permission, so at least half of us can move to a new home. That will be a great day for us all. At this point, he looked down at Poppy. Poppy, he cried, raise up the flag. What? The flag, Poppy, the flag. Oh, and Poppy lifted the white banner high. Looking at it, all she could think of was a flag of surrender. As Longwort took his place before her, one of the crowd called out, Hip, hip, and hooray, shouted all the others. Hip, hip, hooray. Forward, Longwort cried, and he gave a smart nod to Poppy, and they began to march off. The crowd continued to cheer. Poppy had to admit it was a pretty grand moment. When she caught sight of Basil waving frantically to catch her eye, she even felt proud. Within moments, however, everything changed. Grey House, with its cheerful lights and well-wishers, vanished behind them. The moon had all but disappeared behind clouds that promised rain. No stars were visible. The air felt as heavy as wet wool. In the darkness, Poppy had no idea of which direction they were to go. We'll be taking the tar road, Longwort informed her. Fewer obstructions, more visibility. Do we have a meeting place, she asked. The very tip of Dinwood Forest, her father said, just on the far side of the bridge over Glitter Creek. Mr. Oakex's watching tree. He's there most nights. Can't miss it. It's a huge dead oak. How come it's dead? It was hit by lightning once a long time ago. Was Mr. Oakex in the tree at the time? Longwort chuckled. Poppy, there are those who say Mr. Oakex made the lightning himself. He's that kind of bird. Now, my dear, do keep that flag up. Poppy tried, but she was wondering what kind of a chance they'd have with an owl who made his own lightning. Marching down the middle of the road made her nervous. Surely Mr. Oakex would see them. Would he recognize her? And if he did, would he attack? What should she do then? Run? Where? Ashamed to have such worries, Poppy decided it would be better to hide them. So she said nothing. Still, it was hard to keep this heavy flag flying high. Up, Longwort kept calling. He was now walking behind her. They had been marching for some time, during which they had exchanged only a few words. When the night silence was interrupted, suddenly by a hoo-hoo. Startled, Poppy stopped short. In the confusion, Longwort banged into her. He lost his thimble cap and his speech. She dropped the flag. Pick the flag up, her father cried, searching to find both the thimble and the speech in the darkness. Lose the flag and we're done for. Do you think he's seen us? Why else do you think he called? Longwort snapped. The hair on Poppy's spine stood up straight. It wasn't the owl's call that frightened her as much as the fear that she suddenly heard in her father's voice. Never had she heard that before. She peered around at him. He didn't appear scared. Poppy sighed. She decided she must have imagined it, seeing in him what she was feeling. My apologies. The call came again. Hoo, hoo! Poppy, her heart pounded, asked, Father, how much farther to go? Quite a ways, Longheart whispered. And here's another picture. They listened again. No more calls came. Longwort adjusted his hat and gave a forced chuckle. Actually, I suspect that call was just some good-natured joshing. Papa? What? I'm glad you're here. Humph, Longwort replied, but Poppy sensed he was pleased. He felt better until he said, But do keep that flag up. The owl's call came again. For a second time, Poppy stopped. Her father did too. They listened intently for a few moments. Then Longwort whispered, Just as I thought. He's joking. Lightening up. Light up, child. And they moved on. Poppy didn't like to contradict her father, but she doubted Mr. Oakex's calls were a joke. She rather suspected the owl was trying to scare them. And, as far as she was concerned, he was succeeding doing it. Rain all of a sudden began. It came soft at first, but then with a clap of thunder, it burst out right overhead, making them jump. And then the drizzle turned into a deluge. Within seconds, they were soaked. The tar-covered road ran with water. The flag became heavier and heavier and spattered with mud. Shake out the flag, Longwort cried. It must stay white. Poppy tried to do so, as she was told, but it was quite difficult. They trudged on. Off to the left, flashes of lightning allowed Poppy to see all the tall trees of Dinwood Forest. Though she, like the other mice, was well aware of the forest, she really had never visited it. Who would want to? She'd been taught too many fearsome things about its vast size and its dreadful darkness, and the fact that Mr. Oakex had a secret home there someplace. Equally alarming was the knowledge that Dinwood Forest was full of animals that hunted mice, animals like porcupines. Poppy made herself look in another direction. We're getting close now, her father said, his voice tense. Poppy cocked an ear. Over the continuous splash of rain, she heard the rushing waters of Glitter Creek. Then the tar road twisted sharply to the left. They had reached the bridge, a row of heavy wooden planks thrown across the creek. The gaps between the planks were wide enough for a mouse to fall through. Lungwort chose the middle plank, and Poppy followed. Despite her best intentions, she couldn't keep from peeking down. Normally, Glitter Creek was serene. That's another great word, serene. I wish you could ask an elbow buddy what you thought serene meant. So I'm going to read that again. Despite her best intentions, she couldn't keep from peeking down. Normally, so there's a Q word, normally Glitter Creek was serene. The summer rains, though, had made it high, fast, and fairly roaring. So you see the contrast. So serene means calm. Poppy stole a nervous glance at her father. He had stopped to pull at his whiskers. She had never seen him so agitated, and wondered suddenly if he would be able to protect her. She'd never asked that question before, never had to. Just to think it upset her. She looked to her father for reassurance, but all she saw was his frailty. She knew then that he was just as frightened as she was. The realization made her stomach hurt with tension. Lungwort caught her looking at him. "Flag!" he cried, moving forward. Poppy managed to lever the flag up just as she stepped up off the bridge. The moment she did, the air was rent with another cry, or another one of Mr. Oakhorse's cries. "Hoo, hoo!" "There he is!" Lungwort exclaimed. Poppy looked up, and as the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, Mr. Oakhorse's dead oak tree seemed to leap toward them. Against the darkness of Dimwood Forest, she saw the owl's branch reached out like a claw. As for Mr. Oakhorse, his head feathers were standing straight up tall, making him look like a devil. "Don't give way," Poppy said fiercely to herself, even as she trembled. "Don't give way." And here's a picture. It's kind of a cool picture. And that concludes our chapter, I believe. It does. So chapter 6 will come next.